All right, let's go through these solutions for assignment 2, starting with question 1. So there were 6 patterns here, and I have a lot of things highlighted, but I will walk through each of the 6 patterns and what processes are happening. There are possibly other ways to analyze these, but these are the ones that I have found. So in pattern 1, we're going from Dek to Domnik and Sul to Somnul. So we're adding in this om, O-M-N, inside of the root, which would be to sleep or to ask. So this is an example of affixation, particularly infixation. In pattern 2, we're going from taki to tak-taki to make the plural form, and ufu to uf-ufu. So we're adding something to the beginning of each of the roots, and it happens to be that they are the same sounds, at least the first syllable of the base. So that first syllable, tak or uf, is getting reduplicated. So this is partial reduplication. In pattern 3, we see that the vowels have become longer in each, from running to, from run to running, shisad to shisad, and same with pass to passing. The vowels have been lengthened, so this is vowel lengthening. In pattern 4, the sounds are completely changing, and there's not really a pattern between them, so this is a case of suppletion, just like good and better in English. Pattern 5, we have 2 things going on. First, the vowel is changing. So in flower, that initial vowel has changed to make floral, and in clear, that e has been changed to an a. And we're getting an extra affix at the end. So floral is getting ol, clarify, that's getting ify at the end. Okay, and then in pattern 6, there's 2 things happening here. The final consonant is being removed, and then bu is being added. So this is a case of subtraction and then affixation. You could also consider this partial suppletion with just the data provided. So sort of like ring, rang, rung, sing, sang, sung. Maybe the last bit of the root is changing. So L is changing to bu, R is changing to bu. Maybe it's a thing where liquids change to bu. But those are the 6 patterns for question 1. Question 2 gives you a data set and asks you to analyze it. So this is looking at the comparative form of adjectives. So the first thing to do is to draw word trees for lumbi and zikaran. So if we find lum here, lum means warm, and lumbi means more warm. So we just have to note that lum is an adjective, b is an affix, and these join together to make an adjective. Same with zikaran. We see z here is correct. So zikaran is more correct. Karan would be an affix that attaches to z, the adjective, to form a new adjective. Now, these 2 examples together show a different suffix, either b or karan, for making the comparative form. So the next question asks, what is it? Okay, so it's b and karan. And then the next one is, are there specific environments, or do they appear in free variation? So this means that it's up to the individual to choose which form they use. And if we take a look at the data set, we'll find that there are some cases. So if I just remove these markings, we find some cases where you can use either. So more warm can be lumkaran or lumbi. We have the case of more wise, which can be ning xing karan or ning xing bi. So it can take karan or bi. We also have one more, I believe. Yeah, agi karan or agi bi for more cold. So there's just 3 examples there, but we can make a pretty good generalization at this point that any of them, any root can take either bi or karan in this case. And the reason I'm saying this is that there's not really a sound pattern we could go by. Maybe we could say that the last sound has to be voiced or something, but the fact that you can attach a K to it after a voiced consonant doesn't make it seem like it's anything phonological here. So we say they're in free variation and we have a few words to support it. You might have said that it's not free variation because there's too few words, but then you would have to state that some words get free variation and come up with some description for the other words. And that, well, I'll check your analysis to see if you said that and what you came up with. So for part B, this is just practice creating lexical entries in the morpheme-based model. So here's loom and mao for warm and wrong. So again, the top has the phonetic component, the middle has the category or selectional restrictions, so the syntactic component, and then we have the semantic component, meaning at the bottom. So we'll notice that for the affixes, bi and karan, they're identical except for how they're pronounced. But the meanings are exactly the same and what they attach to are exactly the same. They appear after an adjective. So if we want to talk about the general pattern for this, we can say that we have some form X, that's an adjective. And if we want to make the more form, we can make X with a B after it. Or we can do X with a karan after it. So to signal this, we can just do a three-way morphological correspondence, which says that if you have an X form, you can go between the XB form and the X karan form. So is this subtraction? Can you think of this as subtraction, or do we just have to think of it as affixation? And if subtraction works, is it better than affixation? So it's possible to do this as subtraction because we can just remove B or remove karan to go from the more form to the regular form. But is it better? Well, if we can do something with both affixation and subtraction, we should ask which is easier. And in this case, they're both about the same. So adding B or adding karan, this is consistent. You choose one of those two and you add it to the word. It's not like the case of French where we were just deleting a consonant at the end, where the consonant could be anything. It's pretty certain what the suffix has to be here. And we know from many different languages that concatenative processes are way more common than non-concatenative processes. So having an analysis where we're building up words is probably more reflective of real language than an analysis where we're removing something, especially because we're going from an inflected form, the comparative, which would be more X, to the general form. And that seems a little weird. So it's not like going from masculine to feminine or feminine to masculine where there's no default. Having a word without any inflection and a word with inflection, that's a bit of a different story. Usually we inflect words, we don't take inflections off of words. So affixation is probably better than subtraction here for those reasons. Now the third question asks you to look at this data set and create Ian and ism through lexical entries to describe this data. And I give a hint here by italicizing that maybe these affixes behave differently, like they belong in different classes, and that's related. And I also put these little templates for the morphemes up top as another hint. So let's just start with making lexical entries for Ian and ism without worrying about any order. So we have one suffix. Let's start with ism, why not? So here's ism, and let's just use regular text, so I won't put the slashy braces there. That's ism. What is ism attached to? It attaches to nouns. And what is the meaning? Well, let's just not worry too much about the meaning at this point. What does it do? It's going to do one of two things. It's not going to do one of two things in this case. It's always going to keep it as a noun. So we can say this is a noun to noun. Let's do Ian. Okay, so Ian also attaches to nouns, like to Shakespeare or grammar or demon. And it can also, well, it has to attach to the base form there, right? So what does it create? Shakespearean, grammarian, and demonian. Two of those are adjectives, and one of those is a noun. So really, we have two Ian morphemes here, but we won't have to worry too much about that. So we can just do something like this for the sake of abbreviation, because that's not really the point of this problem. The point of this problem is to create some analysis where we cannot get demon ism Ian. So we can't get ism attaching before Ian. So first we have to look at this and figure out whether there's a pattern. So if we take a look at the order, we might just want to give these numbers. So for instance, when I take a look at the more complex ones, like Shakespeareanism and Shakespeareism Ian, I'm going to give Ian the number 1 and ism the number 2, because Ian comes first, and then ism and Ian, I'll put 2, 1 there. And so ism is 2, Ian is 1. So the acceptable forms are just x, or x then 2, or x then 1, or x then 1 then 2, but we cannot have, so this is bad, we cannot have x then 2 then 1. So we can't have x then ism then Ian. So if we just think of like a numerical restriction for this, it's not too bad. Basically, whenever we add suffixes, we always have to add a higher number. So the reason we can't do x2, 1 is because 2 is higher than 1. So that's why that's not good. But we can do 1, 2 because 1 is lower than 2 and 1 is closer. We can go directly x to 2 because we don't have to deal with a 1 after. This just strictly increases. So if we can think of these affixes as like belonging to different classes, then we can create a restriction on how the affixes have to attach. So can you do this in the lexical entry itself? It's possible, but it's not very pretty. So what we might do is say that Ian can attach to nouns, and then we'll put a little comma here, and we'll say that it cannot attach to a noun with a 1 after it. So we could index our things here. Sorry, that was the wrong one. We're talking about ism, right? Ism. Okay, so ism, let's say ism is 2, Ian is 1. Ism, so ism can attach directly or can attach after 1. There's no restrictions. But yeah, Ian 1, it can not attach to something that is a noun with a 2 after it. So this is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, so we can attach Ian directly to a noun, but we cannot attach it to a noun with a class 2 affix already. So I've done this by saying star n2, which means it would be bad to attach to a noun with a second class on it already. So this is how you could do it. Or you could just create bare lexical entries for ism and Ian and use words to describe things. So you could say like ism is CL2, Ian is CL1, and when we have some form X, we have to have it building up like this, where we have like 1s and 2s. So you could have had some description. So that's why I say sometimes we have to be a little bit creative with our answers to see if we can actually get it into the formal model, or if we have to add some extra text to explain it. And usually words are better than coming up with these notations like star n2 and expecting people to understand it. So that was that problem. If you're wondering why this happens, because I didn't ask why, it has to do with stress. So there's a class of affixes that change stress on a word, and there's a class of affixes that don't change stress. And there's a certain order that those have to be attached in. And we'll explore that a little bit later when we talk about productivity and derivation. Okay, finally, the last question. So this one is tough because you might see what's going on here, and you might see a general pattern that connects parts 1 and part 2, but there are some things that make this difficult to write a consistent process for, and we'll talk about that. So I just want to talk about the data first. Let's just zoom in so you're not focused on everything I've written. So sav goes to siv-sev, mar goes to mer-mer, kuf goes to kif-kef, and lim goes to lim-lem. When I see this, I'm looking for common patterns. So I see this as some type of reduplication because sav becomes siv-sev, mar is mer-mer. There's a lot of similarities there. What's changing is the vowel. So siv-sev is I then E. Mer-mer is I then E. Kif-kef is I then E. Lim-lem is I then E in terms of the letters. And on the left here in the base form, it doesn't seem to matter what the vowel is, whether it's a, u, e, it doesn't matter. It always turns into syllable 1 with an I, with an E, and syllable 2 with an A in terms of sounds. So when we do our first model, we're doing some entries for the words themselves just to see the pattern. So sav and siv-sev. And then for the general scheme, we have to denote our consonants here. So this would be like S and V, and then the vowel can be whatever in its base form. But then in the verb form, the consonants and vowels are going to carry over. So C1 is S and C2 is V for this particular example, but the vowels have been replaced with set vowels. So the first vowel is going to be E, the letter I, and the second syllable will have the vowel A, which is the letter E. So that one's not too bad. When we get to part 2, we see something very similar. So lak becomes teep lak lek. Fawn becomes teep fawn fen. These are 3 syllables. And if we were just to model this like I have before, we can do something very similar to before. We have a base form C1V C2. So if we just put like let's do the fawn example. So I'll put F-O-N. So C1 is F, C2 is N, and V is O. So if I just fill these in, teep is given. C1 is F, V is O, C2 is N, C1 is F. We're kept with the E there, and then we get N for C2, and we get tip fon fen. So this can account for it. We have the E fixed, we have tip fixed, and then we keep the vowel the same in the middle. So we didn't get tip fin fen or tip fan fen. The O stayed the same. And it's the same with the adjective lak here. The A is staying the same in the middle. So the final question is, can we account for both of these processes with one model? And more importantly, this actually didn't ask whether you had to create something in the word-based model or not, just whether or not this was the same process. And the answer to this is sort of yes and sort of no. So it's not exactly the same process because there's the set of adjectives in part 2 that go to 3 syllables. So there's going to be a class, let's call this class 1, where it goes from 1 syllables to 2 syllables. And let's call it class 2, where you start with 1 syllable and it ends up as 3 syllables, where the first one is teep. So we have to deal with 2 classes. But if we can get those 2 classes out there, then we know how to deal with each one individually, and we can generalize this a little bit, because the vowel changes are actually consistent between both of the analyses. So if we think about this in terms of position of the syllables, so whether it's the first syllable or the last syllable, what's happening in each of these cases? The first syllable, whether it's teep or whether it's the consonant, the first vowel is always going to be that letter I, the sound E. And in the last syllable, the sound in the nucleus is always going to be A, or the letter E. And the last one will always actually get the same consonant, so C1, E, C2. If there is a middle syllable, nothing is changing at all. So in the case of teep fon fen, fawn is staying exactly the same. But the first one is changing. And if you have a 2-syllable word, so if you have a 2-syllable word, the consonants are being copied. And if you have a 3-syllable word, then you have some fixed sounds in there, T and P. So can we account for this entire thing in one analysis? In terms of what's happening in general, the answer is yes. But in terms of figuring out which words get a 2-syllable form or a 3-syllable form and then modeling that nicely in a formal notation, that can't be done with just the word schemas and morphological correspondences. So there is a pattern, but it has to be described in words and not using our like formal notation. So that is assignment 2. If you have any questions, you know where to contact me: Discord, email, discussion board. No one ever uses that. That's okay. And do not worry about a question like this on quiz 2. This was quite a tough question about reduplication, especially trying to see a general pattern between the two. Because when you see something like teep added, I know the assumption is to think that this is like a unit. Nothing has changed here, but in fact, the vowel has been set up in advance due to the EA rule that we saw in part 1. So good luck on Tuesday.